Alright, Deadpool 2 is amazing. Like, I loved it. Sure, I'm heavily biased and love the character of Deadpool and Ryan Reynolds as an actor, but besides that point, I think Deadpool 2 is the greatest movie of our generation. But this has created one hell of a problem: the X-Men movie timeline. So I did the legwork. I started looking up the answers, trying to understand what it has done. Where does Deadpool 2 place into the timeline? And I figured it all out. Deadpool 2 broke the timeline. But before we can get into how he broke it, we need to know how it even got this bad. Because if you didn't know what's going on with the X-Men franchise and movies, let me explain. Way back in the day, which was a Wednesday by the way, when Marvel was trying to sell off their properties to stay out of bankruptcy, Fox purchased everything with the word mutant on it. So this basically included everything that said X-Men and anything related to the X-Men. They then created one of the first financially successful superhero movies in the form of X-Men. It was then followed up by the sequel, X2, X-Men United. But then, due to Bryan Singer leaving the franchise, they brought in another director for X3, The Last Stand. And The Last Stand is where the problems really came in. While X-Men 1 and X2 were not incredible movies, they were directed by the same guy with the same vision. The third movie brought in a new director as Bryan Singer went off to film Superman Returns for WB. And the new director seemingly wanted to wrap up that whole Dark Phoenix plot before going into his own storyline. The new director's method of getting rid of the Dark Phoenix plot was to basically kill a lot of people, including X-Men mainstays Xavier, Cyclops, and Jean Grey. It's kind of funny when you look back at the forums from 2006 and you see people questioning what's going to come next to the X-Men with those characters dead. But then other people stating that we'll never get another X-Men movie, as movies typically only made 3 at the time. Remember, the X-Men trilogy was before the franchise movie boom that was pretty much started by the MCU and Harry Potter films. The director for Last Stand came out and even said that this is it. The X-Men franchise is a trilogy and they have just wrapped up the main plot. Supposedly, the next plan for Fox was to make solo films for the most popular characters, and talks for things like Wolverine Origins and Magneto Origins began. So far, we had no real problems with the timeline, just some rather interesting choices for the movies. Wolverine Origins came out, and basically it was just a glorified X-Men movie with a bad origin for Wolverine. It didn't fail horribly, but it didn't do spectacularly like they wanted. As a side tangent here, it's funny because Marvel actually rushed out their own Wolverine origin before this movie landed, so that this movie couldn't actually cement the first origin for Wolverine. And it doesn't really matter anyway what happened with this movie because Wolverine Origins was critically panned. This led to Magneto going into development hell, and it was eventually cancelled. But then the Marvel franchise movie started to do well, and someone at Fox decided, screw it, let's throw out the origin movie for the X-Men. And that was how we got X-Men First Class. It was assumed by most that this was a reboot, especially since the actions within the movie didn't seem to line up that well with the actions of the prior X-Men movies. The idea was listed as a prequel to the existing franchise, but it was also a soft reboot to allow them to kind of do what they wanted, and use the characters that wouldn't entirely make sense since they were in a movie that took place 40 years after this one ended. But Fox had a problem. If we are going to go with a full soft reboot, we have Wolverine as Hugh Jackman, and he doesn't join up with the X-Men till the year 2000, and First Class, being set around the 60s, created an issue where they wanted to use Wolverine, but it wouldn't make any honest sense. So they figured, easy fix. They'll continue Wolverine's story after The Last Stand. Wolverine is a large enough character to hold his own movie, and he was. It really wasn't a gamble. But what it did do was establish that Last Stand still completely happened. Meaning that if we soft rebooted all the way back in the 60s, and then Last Stand happened, well, the comic book continuity nuts began to have a conniption. How can the continuity errors this large exist? You can't have characters that were alive in the 1960s only aged like 10 years for the 2005 movie. So Fox figured the X-Men are known for broken timelines and weird stuff. What if we made both timelines exist together? Kind of. So they released Days of Future Past, which involved the future X-Men of the original trilogy sending Wolverine back in time to the First Class era to fix the timeline and prevent his future from happening. It didn't work perfectly, but it did do its job. It allowed us to establish First Class was a separate timeline from the original trilogy, but then things got weird again. We had Deadpool and X-Men Apocalypse, and basically in X-Men Apocalypse, they just stated all timelines exist. It's one giant timeline. Lots more retconning happened, and it was so messy that even the characters who were time traveling just started to ignore everything. And that's when we got Logan, which ended the whole Last Stand timeline and once again ignored the Patrick Stewart body replacement moment from the end of Last Stand. Now at this point, if you're not completely confused as to what's going on, some superfans are going to throw out the question: why can't Fox get this right? The MCU has this down to a T. First off, the MCU really doesn't have it down that well. They're just very good at covering their tracks. Do I need to remind you of the fake Infinity Gauntlet and the Thor Vault? Secondly, and the most important reason, because Fox doesn't care. Well, they do, but they don't. The original trilogy of X-Men movies were made before a cinematic universe was even really a concept. Fox even trying to tie this all together loosely is just them making an attempt at it, and I will say that I'm happy that they just chose to do solid movies instead of constantly trying to fix their continuity and not use characters so it would make sense. Could you picture First Class without Beast or Jean Grey being involved? It's also quite obvious that Fox cares more about a financially successful movie, regardless of the critical acclaim of their movies or what's going on with their continuity. I have images of directors walking into a big producer meeting style office and basically being like, okay, I want to use Beast and Xavier, but I want it to be in the 60s. Also, I want to make a friendship between Magneto, Xavier, and Mystique. Hear me out, because I know this goes against everything shown in the X-Men, but the big time producer spins his big chair around petting his evil cat. Apparently, I think all big time producers are Claw from Inspector Gadget. And anyway, he interrupts our director, telling him, I don't care, just make me a movie that'll make me some money. The director then looks at him trying to explain, but we're gonna get backlash from the hardcore fans, but I think I can do a better movie. And the big time producer pets his cat, pulls down his cigar, and tells him, look at me, you simpleton. If your idea can make us money, I want it now. I don't care about some damn comic book continuity. Wow, this producer's really mean. He then opens up a trap door and the director falls in. That's basically it. Fox just doesn't ultimately care if things link together or not. And that brings us to Deadpool 2, doesn't it? You know, the title of this video. Anyway, let's get to the original timeline pre-Deadpool 2. Keep in mind, this isn't an exact science since there are continuity errors for reasons that I mentioned above. And if you don't know what I'm referencing, watch the first half of this damn video. So using a list from the Den of the Geek, we can establish the time periods for a few things. 3500 BC appears to be X-Men Apocalypse. 1845 to 1944, that would be some events in Wolverine Origins. 1944 to 1962 would be X-Men First Class. This is all established in both timelines. Now, in the first timeline, we then have Wolverine Origins from 1973 to 1979. Original X-Men Trilogy from 2000 to 2005. Wolverine then takes place between 2013 to 2015, and then we get hit with Days of Future Past in 2023. Within this timeline, we also get Logan. Now, I know there was some early debate as to where to place it, but it was confirmed by the director that it is in the Days of the Future Past timeline. And boom, timeline broken as of Days of Future Past. So we go all the way back to 1973, and we're going to get the diverging timeline thanks to Days of Future Past. And the changes that it made led to 1983 X-Men Apocalypse, which then leads to 2016's Deadpool. Now, the assumption that Deadpool is in the new timeline is easily made by the fact that Deadpool 1 seemingly ignores the original crappy Deadpool from the ending of Wolverine Origins, which would allow us to write out all of Wolverine Origins between 1973 and 1979. So we can basically ignore that whole finale. Also in Deadpool 2, we do see the new First Class X-Men cementing it within that timeline, but wait! This is where the problem is. Assuming Deadpool 1 takes place in 2016 and Deadpool 2 takes place in 2018, how are the young X-Men within the movie? Now, the scene was actually filmed by the director of Dark Phoenix, but we can go ahead and assume that since it is that cast during the Dark Phoenix, that scene is taking place in 1992. Now, does that mean that Deadpool 1 is from 1990 and Deadpool 2 is from 1992? But to throw another cog into the timeline confusion, Deadpool 2 opens up by referencing the end of Logan, and that movie takes place in 2029. So is that one superhero spanning 4 decades within one movie? How is that even possible? Well, the most obvious answer is that it's Deadpool, and he kind of ignores things so that he can break the fourth wall. Someone is sitting there going, Betty, he even references the DC Universe. He just breaks the fourth wall all the time. Okay, you're right, weird person with a high screeching voice. And as a Deadpool fan, I can easily accept that and put the movie back at 2018, taking the references and mentions as fourth wall breaking. But wait, there's more. So we get to the mid-credits scene, and Deadpool gets the time travel device and goes back in time to Wolverine Origins 1979 to kill the other version of himself, claiming that he is fixing the timeline. He also removes any need for this movie by bringing back Vanessa. Both of those moments the director has come out and said are in continuity. So what does this all mean? How does Deadpool break the timeline? Well, he went from one timeline to another and back again and basically outright said to the viewer, the timeline doesn't matter. There's no fixing it. You just need to have fun and deal with the consequences. He came in and shot himself in another timeline, breaking any preconceived fan notion that the timelines matter. All for a one-off gag which was hilarious by the way. He then wrote out the requirement for his own movie. So I think it's safe to say that we can stop guessing where these Fox movies are going to take place, and maybe it's something that the MCU could eventually consider, keeping it all linked to the best of their ability, but not sacrificing the characters and the stories themselves. Give us a new Captain America. Give us a new Iron Man. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Oh, and by the way, I liked Deadpool 2 more than Infinity War.